I never imagined that the most painful betrayal of my life would come from the one person I had always trusted without question, my own brother. It started during a time when hope and promise filled every corner of my world, when my fiancée, Sarah, and I believed we were building a future grounded in love, loyalty, and unwavering commitment. I had grown up with my brother, Daniel, as my closest friend and confidant. We shared secrets, dreams, and the kind of bond that only siblings can understand. In every memory of our childhood, his smile and his support were constants that made me feel invincible. I trusted him implicitly, never suspecting that beneath that familiar exterior lay ambitions and desires that would one day shatter everything I held dear. The early days of my relationship with Sarah were blissful and filled with the kind of excitement that made each moment sparkle with promise. We met in college, and our connection was instantaneous, a meeting of minds and hearts that felt predestined. I recall countless evenings spent in small, warmly lit cafes, where we would talk for hours about our dreams, our fears, and the life we imagined together. Sarah was a beacon of light in a sometimes gloomy world. Her kindness, wit, and determination were qualities that made her not only my fiancée but my best friend. In those tender moments, I could never have foreseen the storm that would eventually tear our lives apart. It wasn't until our engagement that subtle shifts began to emerge. Daniel, who had always been supportive of my decisions, started spending more time away from home. At first, I assumed it was simply a phase, perhaps a new job or a personal project that demanded his attention. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice small, unsettling details: hushed phone conversations late into the night, furtive glances over his shoulder when he thought no one was watching, and an uncharacteristic defensiveness whenever I asked him about his whereabouts. I brushed these signs off as nothing more than the quirks of a man pursuing his own ambitions, never imagining that they were the first tremors of an impending earthquake. Sarah, too, noticed Daniel's growing distance. One evening, as we sat on our small balcony overlooking a city that sparkled with possibility, she confided in me that she felt uneasy about the way Daniel had been acting. Her eyes, usually so full of hope, now shimmered with a mix of apprehension and sorrow. I reassured her that it was probably nothing, that my brother was simply caught up in the responsibilities of his own life. I told her to trust that our family bond was unbreakable, that nothing could ever come between the loyalty we shared. I believed my own words, even as a seed of doubt began to take root in my heart, a doubt that I was too afraid to acknowledge openly. As our wedding plans progressed, I busied myself with every detail, from choosing the perfect venue to crafting heartfelt vows that promised a lifetime of devotion. Sarah and I spent long afternoons poring over magazines and websites, dreaming of a day that would symbolize the culmination of our shared journey. Every moment was filled with anticipation, every decision a joyful step toward our future. Yet amid the joy and excitement, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that hovered at the edges of my consciousness like a dark cloud. Then came the night that altered everything. It was a cool, quiet evening in late spring when I returned home earlier than usual from a late meeting at work. The house was dark, and I assumed that Sarah had already drifted off to sleep. As I made my way through the silent rooms, my eyes caught something out of place on the coffee table, a small, elegantly wrapped gift that I didn't recognize. Curiosity mingled with a vague sense of foreboding, and I picked it up, noticing that it wasn't addressed to Sarah or me, but to someone else entirely. My mind raced with questions as I opened the delicate wrapping, revealing a handwritten note and a ring that was far too exquisite and expensive to be an ordinary gift. The note was brief, its elegant script both charming and chilling in its intimacy. It read, "For my dearest love, every moment without you is an eternity. I long for the day when we can be together again." I felt a shudder ripple through me, a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and a deep, unnameable pain. I wondered who could have sent such a gift, and my thoughts turned immediately to Daniel. In the back of my mind, I remembered a recent conversation where he had mentioned a special connection with someone he'd met at a work event, though he had brushed it off as nothing serious. The possibility that my own brother might be involved with someone else, and worse, someone who could be linked to Sarah, was a thought too horrifying to entertain. Over the following days, I found myself grappling with a tumult of emotions. I oscillated between denial and a crushing sense of betrayal. I questioned every moment of my past, searching for signs that I might have missed, wondering how someone so dear to me could harbor such secret passions. I tried to rationalize his behavior, telling myself that perhaps I was misinterpreting a series of coincidences, that my mind was playing cruel tricks on me. Yet deep down, a gnawing certainty began to take hold, a certainty that the gift was only the beginning of a web of deceit that I had yet to fully understand. Late one night, unable to sleep and unable to bear the oppressive silence in the house, I decided to confront the mystery head-on. I retrieved my laptop and began combing through social media profiles, emails, and old text messages, desperate for any clue that might explain the inexplicable gift. I found nothing concrete at first, only scattered fragments of conversations and seemingly innocuous posts that hinted at secret meetings and unexplained absences. Each discovery was like a tiny shard of glass cutting into my soul, and as the minutes turned into hours, I felt the undeniable realization that everything I had trusted was built on a foundation of lies. The evidence mounted gradually, a series of late-night messages between Daniel and a woman whose name I did not recognize at first, a slew of photographs taken in places I knew he had never mentioned visiting, and ambiguous social media posts that hinted at a forbidden love affair. With every new piece of the puzzle, the picture became increasingly clear. Daniel had not only been unfaithful in ways I had never imagined, but he had also orchestrated a secret romance that threatened to upend the very core of my world. The thought that my brother, the person I had shared every triumph and trial with, could betray me in such a callous manner was more than I could bear. I confronted Daniel the next morning, my voice trembling with a cocktail of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I had planned to discuss the matter calmly, to hear his side of the story, but as soon as I mentioned the mysterious gift and the evidence I had uncovered, his face paled to a ghostly hue. For a long moment, silence hung between us like a heavy shroud. I pressed on, demanding answers that I was sure would shatter the fragile remnants of my trust. His eyes darted away, and with a stammered apology, he admitted that he had been involved with someone, a woman whose name he had barely mentioned before. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the weight of his secret crushing him from within. Yet nothing he said could erase the profound sense of betrayal that flooded my heart. The revelation did not stop there. In the days that followed, as I struggled to come to terms with the betrayal by my own flesh and blood, another truth emerged, one so painful that it seemed almost too surreal to be real. Sarah, the woman I had promised to love for a lifetime, had been drawn into this dark undercurrent of deceit. I discovered that during moments when I had been away on work trips or otherwise occupied with the demands of everyday life, Sarah and Daniel had grown dangerously close. It began with seemingly innocent conversations, shared glances, and whispered words that I had dismissed as harmless camaraderie. But as I dug deeper, I uncovered messages that revealed an intimacy that went far beyond friendship, messages that betrayed the blossoming of an affair that had been hidden in plain sight. The betrayal cut me deeply, and the pain was almost physical, a burning, raw sensation that spread through my chest and left me gasping for air. How could the two people I loved most in the world, my brother and the woman I had chosen to spend my life with, collaborate in such treachery? The sense of loss was overwhelming. In that moment, I felt as though everything I had ever believed in was a lie, that the bonds of family and love were nothing more than fragile illusions destined to crumble under the weight of human weakness. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Daniel's initial defiance gave way to a desperate, almost pitiful remorse. He begged for forgiveness, pleading with me in tearful tones that he had lost control, that the circumstances had overwhelmed him. But his words, soaked in regret, fell on ears that were numb with betrayal. I could not simply overlook the enormity of his deception. How could I ever trust a man who had so casually abandoned the sanctity of our bond, who had allowed his desires to overshadow the loyalty we once shared? The road ahead was shrouded in darkness, and I felt the need to retreat from a world that had suddenly become hostile and unrecognizable. In those long, sleepless nights that followed, I isolated myself in my study, poring over old photographs and mementos in a futile attempt to cling to happier memories. I tried to find solace in the laughter of times gone by, in moments of sibling camaraderie that had once defined our relationship. Yet every smile and every shared joke was now tinged with the bitterness of betrayal, a reminder that the person I had once called my brother had become a stranger in my eyes. The emotional wound was raw and unhealed, a festering scar that refused to close. I began to document every painful moment in a journal, each entry a cathartic outpouring of my grief and confusion. The act of writing became my only refuge, a way to make sense of the chaos that had overtaken my life. I recorded every detail, the day I discovered the gift, the cold confrontation with Daniel, the slow, heartbreaking realization that Sarah had been complicit in the affair. With each word, I felt a part of the pain being exorcised, though I knew that nothing I wrote could ever truly undo the damage that had been done. Despite the overwhelming hurt, I was forced to continue with the semblance of a normal life. I still had obligations, to my job, to our mutual friends, and most importantly, to the future I had once envisioned with Sarah. I tried to maintain a routine, attending family gatherings and social events, all the while feeling like a spectator in a life that no longer belonged to me. The betrayal had created an invisible chasm between us, a rift that grew with every forced smile and every casual conversation laden with unspoken tension. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice an unexpected consequence of the chaos that had invaded my life. Karma, in its own inscrutable way, seemed to be exacting its own form of retribution on Daniel. His life, which had once been filled with promise and ambition, began to unravel in ways that were both subtle and devastating. Small misfortunes piled up one after the other, failed business ventures, a series of poor decisions that left him financially strained, and an increasing isolation from the very people who had once admired him. I watched, with a mix of satisfaction and deep sadness, as the brother I once cherished found himself besieged by the consequences of his actions. Yet even as his fortunes crumbled, Daniel never ceased to beg for forgiveness. His phone calls became more frequent, each one a desperate plea for reconciliation, for a chance to make amends that he could never truly repay. I received his messages with a heavy heart, torn between the residual love I still felt for the sibling of my childhood and the bitter sting of betrayal that had forever altered our relationship. In the quiet moments, when the world was asleep and the only sound was the echo of my own heartbeat, I would read his messages over and over, each one a reminder of the irreversible damage that had been done. But forgiveness, I knew, was a journey that required more than just words. It demanded time, introspection, and a willingness to confront the deepest parts of one's soul. I began to wonder if, someday, I could truly let go of the hurt, if the wounds of betrayal could ever be healed by the passage of time. I did not know if I was capable of such magnanimity, or if the scars would remain forever, a permanent testament to a love lost and trust shattered. In the midst of this inner turmoil, I clung to the belief that I must reclaim my own life. I sought solace in long walks along quiet country roads, in the rustle of leaves and the steady cadence of my own footsteps as I tried to outrun the memories that haunted me. I immersed myself in work, finding temporary distraction in the meticulous details of projects that demanded my full attention. Each day was a battle, a struggle to maintain a sense of normalcy while the ghosts of betrayal whispered relentlessly in my ear. And yet, in those moments of solitude, I also discovered a glimmer of strength I had never known before, a resilience that urged me to rebuild, to find a way forward even when every fiber of my being screamed to retreat. I have come to understand that betrayal, in all its crushing weight, can also be a catalyst for profound transformation. While the wounds of the past remain unhealed, I have begun to see that they do not have to define my entire existence. There is a harsh, unyielding truth in the idea that the pain inflicted by those we love can ultimately lead us to a deeper understanding of who we are. As I look back on these dark days, I realize that I am standing at the crossroads of loss and renewal, forced to choose between wallowing in sorrow or rising from the ashes to reclaim my own destiny. Now, as I sit in the quiet of an early morning, with the first light of dawn creeping through the window and casting gentle shadows on the walls of my study, I know that the journey ahead will be long and fraught with challenges. I have not yet forgiven Daniel, nor have I forgiven Sarah, but I have begun to forgive myself for the choices I made in the face of betrayal. I have learned that forgiveness is not a destination but a process, a gradual unfolding of healing that must come on its own time. In the silence of that morning, with my journal open before me and the memories of shattered trust still vivid in my mind, I vow to continue this journey of introspection and recovery. I will face the pain, acknowledge the wounds, and slowly piece together the fragments of a life that has been irrevocably altered by betrayal. I know that the road to redemption is long, and that the scars of yesterday may never fully fade, but I also know that I must choose to live for the future rather than be imprisoned by the past. This is not the end of my story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I will learn to navigate the delicate balance between love and loss, between holding on and letting go. And though the memories of that fateful betrayal will always linger like ghosts in the corners of my mind, I am determined to forge ahead, to find a way to rebuild a life defined not by the sins of others but by the strength I discover within myself. For now, I carry on with cautious hope, knowing that every day is a step toward healing. I have embraced the bitter lessons of the past as a necessary part of my journey, and I remain steadfast in my resolve to protect my future from the shadows that once threatened to consume it. With every sunrise, I awaken to the possibility of redemption, and with every step I take, I move further away from the darkness, inching closer to the light of a new dawn. I spent the following days in a haze of disbelief and sorrow, barely able to reconcile the shards of my former life with the raw, unfiltered reality of betrayal. Every morning I awoke with a heavy heart, the ghost of that shocking discovery lingering like a dark stain over every thought and action. I found myself wandering the familiar rooms of my home as if searching for remnants of a love that no longer existed, each step echoing the loss of trust and the bitter taste of betrayal. The images of my once happy days with Sarah were now interlaced with painful memories of whispered secrets and sly, unguarded glances from my own brother, Daniel, a man I had once admired and depended upon. In those early days after the confrontation, the atmosphere in our household shifted in ways I could neither control nor fully comprehend. I attempted to hold on to some semblance of normalcy for Sarah's sake. She was as shattered as I, and every time I looked at her, her eyes, once so full of promise and gentle humor, now mirrored a deep, quiet despair. We continued to plan for our future together, a future that I had believed was unbreakable, while both of us navigated the overwhelming shock of betrayal. Our wedding plans, which had once been filled with excitement and tender anticipation, now felt like cruel reminders of a promise that had been tainted by deceit. The fine details of a gown, the ideal venue, and even the simple act of imagining our life together all served to amplify the contradiction between what we had once known and the unsettling truth that now lurked beneath the surface. During this time, Daniel's life began to unravel in ways that mirrored the disintegration of our once solid family bond. I received his messages and phone calls, each laden with regret and pleading tones, that seemed to come more frequently as his world crumbled around him. At first, I resisted the temptation to respond, unwilling to open old wounds that had already cut so deeply. Yet, as days turned into weeks, his desperate entreaties grew impossible to ignore. His words were a jumble of regret, sorrow, and pleas for forgiveness, delivered in moments when he appeared more broken than the man I had once known. I would catch snippets of his voice on the phone, hoarse, trembling, and filled with remorse, as he tried to explain that he had lost control, that the choices he had made were a series of unfortunate mistakes spiraling out of his grasp. I listened in silence, feeling the sting of every syllable, knowing that nothing he said could ever undo the deep betrayal. Each night, I would sit alone in the stillness of my room, my journal open before me, attempting to document the tumult of emotions that churned within me. I wrote about the disbelief that had transformed into a relentless ache, about the vivid images of that fateful evening when I discovered the gift in the note, a moment forever etched in my memory as the beginning of the end. I recorded the conflicting sensations of anger and sorrow that ebbed and flowed like a relentless tide. I tried to dissect every conversation, every glance, every small act that now seemed laced with betrayal. And yet, the more I wrote, the more I realized that some truths were too vast to be contained by mere words on a page. Sarah, though equally heartbroken, began to transform in subtle ways. At first, she retreated into herself, a quiet, sorrowful figure whose laughter had been silenced by the enormity of our shared pain. I noticed how she would sit for hours by the window, her eyes fixed on some distant horizon as if trying to find solace in the light beyond the darkness of our present. Her once vibrant spirit now flickered weakly, as though each memory of love was countered by the piercing reminder of our loss. Yet, in her moments of vulnerability, I also saw sparks of the strength that had drawn me to her in the first place, the quiet resilience that allowed her to hold on, even as the world around us disintegrated. One evening, after a particularly long and sorrowful day, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in our small living room, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of our old house settling in the quiet night. With tears silently streaming down her face, she reached out and took my hand, her grip trembling but determined. In that unspoken moment, as our eyes met in a shared understanding of pain and loss, we both acknowledged that our lives had irrevocably changed. There were no grand declarations or promises of immediate healing, only the mutual recognition that we would have to learn to live with the scars left behind by betrayal. In the days that followed, I began to see the far-reaching effects of Daniel's actions. Karma, as elusive and enigmatic as it often is, seemed to manifest in subtle yet persistent ways. Daniel's once promising career began to falter. A series of ill-fated decisions led to missed opportunities and the collapse of ventures he had once poured his heart into. Friends who had once looked up to him now distanced themselves, leaving him isolated and drowning in regret. Every setback, every moment of misfortune that befell him, served as a painful reminder of the consequences of his choices. I watched, torn between a sense of justice and an abiding sadness for the brother I once cherished, as the universe exacted its own silent retribution upon him. Despite the unraveling of his own life, Daniel's pleas for forgiveness continued unabated. I received text messages and phone calls from him that began to fill my quiet hours. He would say things like, "I'm sorry for everything, I never meant to hurt you, and I know I've ruined everything, please, just let me make it right." Each message was met with a heavy silence from my side, a silence born of heartbreak and the knowledge that forgiveness was not a simple act, nor something that could be freely given when trust had been so profoundly broken. His words, even as they poured forth in desperate repetition, only deepened the wound. I felt a tumult of emotions: anger, disappointment, sorrow, and a lingering, painful sense of loss for the relationship we had once shared. As Daniel's situation grew increasingly dire, I found myself grappling with my own internal conflict. On one hand, there was the abiding love and loyalty I had for my family, the hope that maybe, just maybe, time would heal the rift that now divided us. On the other hand, there was the stark reality of betrayal, the knowledge that the man I had once considered my closest friend had not only stolen the love of my life but had done so by violating the sacred trust that bound us together. I began to question whether forgiveness was even possible, or whether it would forever remain an elusive ideal, a mirage that taunted me with the possibility of reconciliation even as the wounds refused to heal. In the midst of this inner turmoil, Sarah and I made the difficult decision to attend counseling together. We realized that our shared pain needed to be addressed head-on if there was any hope of rebuilding our shattered lives. In the soft, secure space of our therapist's office, we began to unravel the tangled threads of our emotions. I spoke of the deep sense of betrayal and the way each memory, each forgotten detail, now felt like a dagger twisting in my heart. Sarah, in her gentle, measured voice, recounted the gradual erosion of her trust, the painful realization that the person she had chosen to love had been living a double life that threatened to destroy everything they had built. Our sessions were raw and unguarded, each word a step toward confronting the painful truths that had long been buried under layers of denial and forced smiles. Slowly, through weeks of therapy, the first tentative steps toward healing began to emerge. We learned that healing was not about forgetting the betrayal but about accepting it as a part of our past, a chapter in our lives that, though painful, could eventually lead to a deeper understanding of who we were. Our therapist encouraged us to focus on the present, to find solace in the small, everyday moments that still held promise, even amidst the lingering sorrow. We discovered that sometimes a shared tear, a quiet moment of understanding, could begin to bridge the chasm between a broken past and an uncertain future. At the same time, I couldn't escape the painful reality that my brother's actions had cast a long shadow over every aspect of my life. I began to notice that in moments of unexpected stillness, memories of Daniel's betrayal would intrude upon my thoughts, images of the beautifully wrapped gift I had found, the delicate script of that fateful note, and the furtive glances that had once passed between him and Sarah. Each recollection was like a shard of glass, sharp and unyielding, cutting through the fragile fabric of my hope. I tried to bury these memories beneath layers of routine and distraction, immersing myself in work, seeking solace in solitary walks along quiet streets, and losing myself in the creative projects that had always brought me comfort. Yet no matter how hard I tried, the betrayal lingered, a persistent reminder of the fragility of trust. One particularly long and stormy night, as rain battered against the windows and the wind howled like a chorus of sorrow, I found myself unable to sleep. The darkness pressed in around me as I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching a worn photograph of happier times, a snapshot of Sarah and me laughing together under a clear blue sky, our eyes alight with dreams of the future. In that quiet, oppressive moment, I allowed myself to weep for the life that had been shattered by lies, for the brother who had betrayed me, and for the love that now seemed tarnished beyond repair. The tears flowed freely, each drop a silent testament to the deep, unyielding pain that had become my constant companion. In the days that followed, as Daniel's life continued its downward spiral and my own heart struggled to mend, I found solace in unexpected places. I began to notice small acts of kindness from strangers, a warm smile in a crowded store, a gentle word of encouragement from a colleague, the quiet understanding in a nod exchanged with someone who seemed to sense the weight of my sorrow. These fleeting moments, though brief, reminded me that even in the depths of betrayal and despair, there existed a quiet beauty in the resilience of the human spirit. They were a balm to my wounded heart, small sparks of light in a seemingly endless darkness. I also found that writing served as a powerful outlet, a means of exorcising the demons that haunted my every waking moment. I poured my heart onto countless pages of my journal, documenting every thought, every moment of grief, and every small glimmer of hope that managed to break through the oppressive gloom. In those written words, I began to piece together a narrative of survival, a story that acknowledged the pain of betrayal while also hinting at the possibility of redemption and renewal. The act of writing, in its raw and unvarnished honesty, allowed me to reclaim a part of myself that had been lost in the overwhelming tide of hurt and confusion. As weeks turned into months, I began to see subtle changes in the way life unfolded around me. Sarah, too, started to rediscover fragments of her old self, a quiet strength that had lain dormant beneath the layers of hurt. Together, we found ways to honor the past while also looking forward to a future that, though uncertain, held the promise of new beginnings. We started to take small trips away from the relentless reminders of our shared pain, seeking refuge in quiet, natural settings where the world seemed to slow down and offer us a moment of respite. In those fleeting hours beneath open skies and among whispering trees, we dared to imagine that perhaps the future could hold more than just the scars of betrayal, it could hold hope. Yet, even as we made strides toward healing, the shadow of Daniel's actions loomed large. His life continued to deteriorate in a series of unfortunate events that felt almost poetic in their inevitability. Business deals he had once pursued with fervor collapsed unexpectedly, relationships he had taken for granted crumbled one after the other, and every attempt he made to rebuild himself seemed to be met with an unyielding force of misfortune. His once spirited phone calls turned into desperate, broken pleas, each one a reminder that he was caught in a cycle of self-destruction, a cycle from which there seemed to be no escape. There were moments when I felt the pull of conflicting emotions, a constant tug-of-war between the remnants of familial love and the searing pain of betrayal. I questioned whether I could ever fully forgive him, or whether the wounds he had inflicted would remain forever, a permanent testament to a trust irreparably broken. I oscillated between anger and pity, between a desire for retribution and the faint hope that he might someday find redemption on his own terms. In the quiet solitude of my reflections, I acknowledged that forgiveness was not something that could be forced or rushed. It was a slow, painstaking process that demanded both time and introspection. In one particularly quiet afternoon, as the autumn light filtered softly through the window of our modest living room, I found myself sitting across from Sarah at the kitchen table, our hands intertwined in a tentative gesture of unity. With a steady voice, she spoke of her own journey through the labyrinth of pain and betrayal, a journey marked by moments of profound sorrow but also by small, unexpected victories. She recalled how she had once believed that the love we shared was invincible, and how the shock of discovering Daniel's betrayal had left her questioning everything she had ever known. Yet, through tears and whispered promises of a better tomorrow, she had slowly begun to reclaim her sense of self, piece by fragile piece. In her words, I heard the quiet echo of resilience, the determination to rebuild not just a life, but a future where the scars of the past would serve as reminders of how far we had come, rather than as chains that would forever bind us to our grief. That conversation marked a turning point for us. Together, we began to take deliberate steps toward healing. We attended more therapy sessions, both individually and as a couple, and slowly, the walls that had been erected in the aftermath of betrayal began to show cracks. It was a slow process, each day a small step away from the darkness and a cautious move toward a future that promised renewal. We learned to speak honestly about our pain, to share our fears and insecurities without judgment, and to gradually rebuild the trust that had been so brutally shattered. In the midst of this long, arduous journey, I continued to grapple with the reality of Daniel's actions and the consequences that had followed. Every time I received one of his messages, a feeble, desperate plea for forgiveness, a remorseful recounting of yet another setback, I felt a flicker of the old brotherly bond that had once defined our relationship. Yet that flicker was always quickly smothered by the overwhelming memory of betrayal. I began to see that while the pain he had caused might never fully disappear, it did not have to define my entire existence. I could choose to move forward, to allow the wounds to heal slowly over time, even if the scars remained as silent witnesses to a past that could not be changed. As autumn turned to winter, and the first frost dusted the edges of our small town, I realized that despite everything, I was beginning to reclaim the fragments of my own identity. I found solace in the creative outlets that had long been a part of who I was, a sketchpad here, a new novel there, and even the quiet act of tending to a small garden in the backyard, nurturing life in defiance of the bitter cold. Each small act was a testament to my will to survive, to rise above the betrayal and the pain. And though I knew that the road to complete healing was long and uncertain, I allowed myself to dream of a day when the echoes of that devastating betrayal would no longer dictate the terms of my happiness. Now, as I write these words in the dim light of a winter evening, I realize that my journey is far from over. The path ahead remains fraught with challenges, and the wounds inflicted by betrayal may never entirely disappear. But I have also come to understand that within the depths of pain lies the potential for profound transformation. I have learned that sometimes, it is only by confronting our darkest moments that we can truly begin to see the light of a new dawn. I still receive Daniel's messages, each one a reminder of the choices he made and the consequences that have followed, but I no longer allow them to control my emotions. I have begun to set boundaries, to focus on the future I am building with Sarah, and to reclaim the life that was almost lost to the weight of betrayal. Every day, I make the conscious decision to live for the future rather than be imprisoned by the past. I look at Sarah, whose gentle strength inspires me to be a better man, and I am reminded that love, even when scarred by betrayal, has the power to heal. I continue to document my journey in my journal, not as an act of mourning for what was lost, but as a celebration of the resilience that has brought me to this point, a resilience forged in the crucible of heartbreak and tempered by the slow, steady passage of time. I know that I will never forget the events that shattered my world, nor will I ever fully forgive the betrayal that came from the one person I trusted most. Yet, I have come to accept that forgiveness is not a single act, but a series of small, daily choices to let go of the bitterness, to honor the memory of what once was, and to create space for something new and more authentic. And so, as I continue along this winding path of healing, I hold on to the hope that one day, the scars will not only be a testament to the past but a source of strength for the future. For now, I live each day with cautious optimism, cherishing the moments of warmth and light that pierce through the lingering shadows. I remain determined to build a life that honors the love I once knew while embracing the possibilities of a tomorrow that is not defined solely by the betrayals of the past. And as I step forward into that uncertain future, I do so with the knowledge that each small act of healing is a step toward reclaiming my own destiny, one where forgiveness, though hard one, ultimately sets me free. Even as the winter winds blow and the memories of betrayal remain vivid in my mind, I choose to believe that redemption and renewal are possible. I have learned that the journey through pain is not one of endless suffering, but also a pathway to rediscovering who I am and what it means to love and be loved. And with that understanding, I continue to move forward, one fragile, determined step at a time, toward a future where the past no longer holds me captive and where the promise of a new dawn beckons with gentle, unwavering light. I spent many sleepless nights, my mind churning with a mixture of fury, sorrow, and a begrudging curiosity about what the future might hold. In the months that followed the explosive revelations and painful confrontations, the wreckage left behind by my brother's betrayal continued to shape every moment of my existence. I found myself teetering on the edge of despair and reluctant acceptance, grappling with the reality that nothing could ever restore the innocence of the past. The life I had once envisioned, a future built on unwavering trust and the promise of a shared tomorrow with Sarah, had been torn apart by the person I loved most, leaving me with a raw emptiness that threatened to consume me. Yet, even in the midst of such profound loss, I slowly began to notice the tiniest glimmers of hope, like faint stars emerging through a bleak, cloudy night. At first, the days blurred together in a numbing routine. I woke to the harsh glare of morning light that illuminated memories of happier times, of Sarah's radiant smile and the comforting presence of my brother by my side, only to have those images dissolve into a bitter recollection of betrayal. I retreated into myself, spending long hours in the solitude of my study, pouring out my anguish onto countless pages in a journal that became both my confessional and my lifeline. With every word I wrote, I tried to make sense of how the man I had once admired could have so casually dismantled the trust we had built over a lifetime. The ink on those pages slowly became a roadmap of my descent into darkness, yet also a record of the painful steps toward eventual healing. There were moments when I would catch Sarah gazing out of a rain-streaked window, her eyes distant and unfocused, as though searching for an answer in the falling drops. I would reach out and hold her hand, silently pleading for reassurance even as I wrestled with my own despair. We found ourselves sitting in the quiet corners of our once happy home, words coming in halting fragments as we attempted to navigate the chasm that had opened between us. The vibrant dreams of our future had been replaced by a jagged, uncertain path, and every step forward was marred by the weight of betrayal. Yet in those moments, as we sat side by side amid the ruins of our shared life, we discovered that pain, while it could fracture the spirit, might also serve as the catalyst for transformation. One chilly afternoon, when the wind howled outside like the anguished cries of a wounded heart, I received another desperate message from Daniel. His words, dripping with remorse, pleaded for forgiveness, a forgiveness that seemed as distant and elusive as the memory of the brother I once knew. "I'm sorry," he wrote repeatedly, each message a frantic cry for absolution in a language I no longer recognized. I stared at the screen in silence, the familiar letters now twisted by betrayal. For a long time, I refused to respond. Every fiber of my being rebelled at the thought of reuniting with someone whose choices had so irrevocably shattered the foundation of my life. Yet, as time wore on and the consequences of his actions manifested in the downfall of his once promising ventures and the gradual disintegration of his social circle, I began to see a pattern, a subtle, inexorable force of karma that was exacting its own form of punishment. In the midst of my inner turmoil, I found myself standing before a mirror one cold morning, the reflection a haunting reminder of the man I had become, a man who wore the scars of betrayal like a suit of armor. The face that stared back was etched with lines of sorrow and resilience, each wrinkle a testament to the long, arduous journey I had been forced to endure. In that moment, I realized that holding on to the past, with all its bitterness and regret, would only keep me chained to the memory of what I had lost. I began to understand that forgiveness, true, liberating forgiveness, was not about condoning the transgressions or erasing the pain. It was about releasing the hold that the past had on my soul so that I could finally breathe freely again. I started by allowing myself small acts of compassion toward the brother who had once been my closest friend. I did not tell him I was ready to forget the past, how could I? But I did begin to acknowledge that his life was in ruins, that the choices he had made had led him down a path of self-destruction from which there might still be a way back, however narrow and uncertain. Slowly, with the guidance of a compassionate therapist and long, soul-searching conversations with Sarah, I decided to agree to one final meeting with Daniel. We arranged to meet at a quiet, secluded cafe that overlooked a park where autumn leaves danced in the gentle breeze, a place that held no judgment, only the possibility of a raw, honest conversation. The day of that meeting was overcast, the sky a muted canvas of grays that seemed to mirror my conflicted emotions. I arrived early, my heart pounding in anticipation of confronting the painful embodiment of betrayal. When Daniel arrived, he looked diminished, a shell of the once confident man I had grown up with. His eyes were rimmed with red from sleepless nights, and his posture was slumped with the weight of his own remorse. For a long, heavy moment, we simply sat across from one another, the silence punctuated by the distant murmur of conversations and the soft clink of cups in the background. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice barely audible at first, then rising in desperate urgency. He apologized again and again, recounting his missteps, his regrets, and the slow unraveling of his life. He spoke of how the karma he had long ignored was now catching up with him, of failed business deals, of estranged friends, and of the isolation that gnawed at his soul. His words were sincere, yet each plea felt like another reminder of the irreversible damage he had inflicted on me and on the people I loved. As he spoke, I felt the turbulent storm of my emotions begin to subside ever so slightly. I realized that while his apologies could never undo the betrayal, they might be a first, painful step toward an understanding that would allow me to move forward. I told him, in a voice that was firm yet laden with sorrow, that forgiveness was not an instant gift to be granted at the whim of desperate remorse. It was a journey, a long, arduous process of healing that I was only just beginning to embark upon myself. I explained that my heart was still in tatters, that the wounds were deep and the scars would remain as a permanent reminder of the fractured trust. Yet, I also admitted that I was willing to try to let go of the bitterness that had chained me to the past, even if only in small increments. I urged him to take responsibility for his actions, to seek redemption not merely through words, but through tangible changes that might one day mend the broken bonds of our family. The conversation stretched on for hours, neither of us knowing if we were truly healing or merely delaying the inevitable pain of separation. In that dialogue, I began to see that forgiveness was as much a gift to myself as it was to him. By releasing the overwhelming need for vengeance, I was reclaiming a part of my own spirit, a part that had been suffocated by anger and despair. Daniel listened intently, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, as I recounted the painful days and nights I had endured since that fateful discovery. I spoke of the way each memory had cut me, the ceaseless echo of betrayal that haunted every corner of my life, and the determination it had taken to rise each morning despite the overwhelming sorrow. As the meeting drew to a close, a heavy stillness settled over us, one that was filled with a quiet understanding of the long road ahead. Daniel promised that he would seek professional help, that he would work to rebuild his life and, in time, earn the forgiveness that he so desperately sought. I told him that I could not promise reconciliation in the way that might restore our old relationship, but that I would allow time and honest effort to be the measure of any future change. The cafe, with its muted light and gentle hum of everyday life, seemed to hold the potential for a fresh start, a place where forgiveness was not instantaneous, but could gradually blossom from the seeds of regret and the courage to change. Returning home from that meeting, I felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. There was no sudden catharsis, no miraculous erasure of the past, only a tentative, fragile step toward a future where the pain might eventually yield to healing. In the days and weeks that followed, I found solace in the small, incremental changes that began to reshape my inner world. I continued therapy, both alone and with Sarah, and slowly started to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of betrayal. I discovered that even in the midst of profound loss, there could be moments of beauty, an unexpected smile from a stranger, the gentle warmth of a sunrise, the soft murmur of the wind whispering promises of renewal. Sarah and I began to rebuild our lives together with a cautious optimism. We attended counseling sessions where we learned to communicate our deepest fears and vulnerabilities without judgment, forging a new bond that was stronger for its honest acknowledgement of our pain. The wedding that had once symbolized a future of bliss now served as a reminder of everything we had lost, but also of everything we were determined to preserve, our shared commitment to moving forward despite the shadows of the past. In our quiet moments, as we held each other close, we spoke of forgiveness not as an end in itself, but as an ongoing process, a deliberate choice to embrace the future while honoring the scars that had made us who we were. Meanwhile, Daniel's downward spiral continued, but I began to see that his suffering was not something I could or should fix. It was his burden to bear, a painful consequence of choices made in moments of weakness. I made peace with the fact that I could only control my own journey, that the healing process was as personal and as unpredictable as the shifting tides. In forgiving him, I was not excusing his behavior or erasing the betrayal, I was simply freeing myself from the shackles of perpetual anger. I vowed to focus on rebuilding my own life, to nurture the relationships that still held promise, and to honor the resilience that had carried me through the darkest hours. Over time, the heavy fog of despair that had once suffocated me began to lift, replaced by a cautious lightness of being. I found new ways to express my creativity. Writing became not only an outlet for my pain but also a celebration of the strength that had emerged from adversity. I started attending local support groups where I met others who had suffered similar betrayals, and in those shared stories I found the comforting realization that I was not alone. Their journeys of recovery, each uniquely painful yet inspiring, reminded me that the human spirit could endure even the deepest wounds. In the quiet solitude of a crisp spring morning, I took a walk along a winding path that led to a serene lake. The water, still and reflective, seemed to capture fragments of the sky, a mosaic of soft blues and gentle grays that spoke of both sorrow and the promise of renewal. As I walked, I reflected on the tumultuous months that had reshaped my world. I recalled the heartbreak of discovering my brother's treachery, the shattering realization that the person I had once trusted implicitly had betrayed me in the most personal way imaginable. And yet, I also recalled the strength that had emerged from that pain, the small acts of kindness from strangers, the unwavering support of Sarah, the quiet moments of clarity that had illuminated the darkest corners of my soul. That day, as I stood by the lakeside, watching the ripples dance across the water, I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would no longer allow the past to dictate my future, that I would embrace each new day as an opportunity to heal and to grow. I recognized that the scars of betrayal might never fully vanish, but they could serve as reminders of my journey, a testament to the resilience and strength that had carried me through even the most devastating storms. I vowed to live with compassion, to extend forgiveness not just to those who had wronged me but also to myself, for the mistakes made in the crucible of heartbreak. In the months that followed, Sarah and I slowly began to build a new rhythm of life. We rediscovered the joy of small, everyday moments, a shared cup of coffee at dawn, an evening walk through the neighborhood as the sun dipped below the horizon, the laughter of our friends during quiet dinner parties. Each of these moments, though seemingly insignificant, became a building block in the reconstruction of our trust and our hope for a future that, while irrevocably changed, held the possibility of light beyond the darkness. As I continued to walk this difficult path, I learned that forgiveness is not a single, monumental act but a series of choices made day by day. I allowed myself to feel anger when it surged, but then I chose to let it pass, replacing it with a quiet acceptance of the impermanence of pain. I reached out to old friends and family members who had been affected by the betrayal, slowly mending relationships that had been strained by the shock and disillusionment of it all. In each conversation, I strove to remind myself that healing is a process, a journey toward understanding that the bonds of love, once broken, can sometimes be rebuilt through honesty, vulnerability, and time. There were still days when the memory of that fateful night would resurface with all its raw intensity, the feeling of betrayal, the bitter taste of the note, the haunting images of my brother's furtive glances. But gradually, those memories began to lose their sharp edge. They became part of a broader narrative, a narrative that included both the pain of loss and the courage to rebuild. I began to see that, in some strange way, the suffering had also granted me a deeper understanding of who I was and what I truly valued in life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on the long, winding road that has brought me to this moment of tentative peace, I realize that my journey is far from over. The scars remain, a permanent reminder of a love betrayed and a family shattered. But I have also discovered that there is beauty in the process of healing, that every day offers a new opportunity to rewrite the story of my life. I continue to embrace the hope that redemption is possible, not for those who have wronged me, but for myself, as I learn to forgive, to love, and to trust again. I have come to understand that the most profound transformations often arise from the deepest wounds. In the final analysis, I have chosen to let go of the past, not because I have forgotten what happened, but because I refuse to let it define the entirety of my existence. I carry the lessons learned from that bitter betrayal as a quiet strength, a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable pain, there is always the possibility of renewal. As I look forward to each new day, I do so with a cautious optimism and a heart that, though scarred, is determined to beat on in the rhythm of hope and resilience. I know now that forgiveness is not about erasing the past, but about building a future where trust, even if fragile, can be nurtured back to life. And so, with every sunrise, I step forward into the uncertain light of tomorrow, resolved to create a life that honors the memory of what was lost while embracing the promise of what can be found. In the quiet moments, when the world is still and the echoes of the past seem to whisper in the shadows, I remind myself that I am more than the sum of my pain. I am the embodiment of every small act of courage that led me from darkness into the fragile, yet beautiful, light of a new beginning.